Welcome to the Content Champion Podcast. We provide the training and tools to help you become a content marketing champion in your online business. Introducing your host, the content champion himself, Loz James.
Welcome to the Content Champion Podcast. Thanks for listening. On today's show, I'm delighted to welcome Nick Disabato, the writer, designer, and A/B testing expert, and author of the A/B Testing Manual. Nick's draft design consultancy has a proven track record of using research-driven A/B testing to increase revenue for his e-commerce clients. And I'm hoping to tap into this specialist knowledge today so we can make meaningful conversion decisions on our own business websites. As ever, you can download all the show notes and transcripts of this podcast at contentchampion.com. So let's dive in. Thanks for coming on, Nick.
Happy to be here.
Now, before we get the lowdown on A/B testing, we'd love to hear your backstory first, please.
Sure. So I come from an interaction design, user experience type background. I don't have that much of a marketing background. I know a lot about design research methodology and about, for lack of a better term, product, I guess it's called these days, and got into A/B testing because I actually kind of fell into it by accident. I was thinking about things that I could do on retainer basis and things that could have involved design activity in some capacity. So A/B testing seems like a really good fit. Fell into that about 3.5 years ago now. I started a Draft Revise, which is a now quarterly A/B testing service. And I've been doing that ever since.
And just on that, with the work you do through Draft, what are some of the mistakes that people are making when you go to them to work on their A/B testing?
Yeah, so a lot of people come to Draft, have tried A/B testing and it hasn't worked out well for them. And they're trying to figure out why. And the most common mistake is jumping directly into A/B testing. The most common scenario I see is somebody hears A/B testing is the new hotness. And here's some A/B tests that you can run. And it's like a call to action color test or like a headline test or something like that. And they're just like, change the headline. And so you change the headline and it turns out inconclusive. And either you don't have enough traffic to get A/B tests to statistical significance. That's not uncommon. But more importantly, you haven't really bothered thinking through exactly what headline to be using or what call to action to be doing or what layout is working well. These incremental changes don't really work very well as A/B tests. So I recommend kind of a rethink of the process. Obviously, because I'm a designer, when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? So I recommend design research methodology for this. And so I say, okay, well, let's try and figure out what to test and what might be the most high impact place to test. And I find that results in a much higher success rate for my testing efforts. And it still provides a solid ROI because the goal is to make more back than you spend on this entire process, right? People feel discouraged when it's like, well, not only did I have to pay for an A/B testing framework, not only do I have a consultant, but now this consultant wants to go out and do research. And that's crazy because it doesn't seem like that has anything to do with A/B testing. I spend a lot of time saying, no, actually it does. It's fundamentally a question of measuring the economic impact of a design decision. That's what A/B testing is. And that can be anything, right? You can change the color of your call to action and determine that it's not actually providing a significant lift. But I would rather use that as a very powerful tool to either do more ambitious changes or more focused and intentional changes that actually match what your customers are telling you.
Okay, so it's a research-based strategic process. And just winding it back to the definition you gave there in that answer, A/B testing at its heart is just looking at one variable at a time to try and increase the conversion on that variable. How do you see that as a definition for people that don't know?
Yeah, so if you know nothing about A/B testing, it's the scientific method applied to making changes on your website. So you have a control, it's your existing website, and then you have a change. That's the variation. They are A and B, hence A/B testing. You send 50% of your traffic to each variation and track your customers to see what their behavior is. That one goal is usually sales or revenue, average revenue per user. Those are the most common that I use. But you can track anything, and I track usually multiple things at once. So if you're like a SaaS business or something like that, I'll say like clicks to pricing, clicks to sign up, actual signups, conversions from trial. All of those things are different goals. But you're focusing, usually there's one primary goal that you're using to calculate out whether or not this worked well. It's dangerous to use kind of secondary metrics for that for a lot of reasons, and we can get into details about that later. But yeah.
Okay, so when you start working with clients, a lot of them are maybe wary about going from a research point of view first because they want to get sort of into using all the tools that you can use online now, and small businesses can use them to do A/B testing quite cheaply. But you have to sort of rail them back and say, no, this is a scientific research-based process. Tell us about that. Tell us about your approach to A/B testing.
Yeah, sure. So it begins with research, obviously. So if you aren't doing a whole lot of research, I set some things up. So that can involve either quantitative research, which you might already be passively collecting, like Google Analytics or like browser device analysis or something like that, to heat maps, scroll maps, behavior recordings, those sorts of things. I'm taking a look at all of those to see how people are actually behaving in practice. In addition to that is more qualitative methods of A/B testing or of research that include user interviews, conducting usability tests, conducting surveys, and asking for more free-form responses. And then in the middle is kind of more of a quantitative and qualitative hybrid where you have things like you can take a look at behavior recordings. You can try and understand how long it takes somebody to go through a funnel, but you're actually seeing what their behavior actually looks like. I'm setting all of those things up. I might put together a screener and get people on the phone for interviews. And I'm definitely getting heat maps and scroll maps because those are very cheap and easy ways to get high impact results. And then determining, okay, well, it seems like people are dropping off here. What can we do about that? It seems like people have a reservation about buying the product because of this reason, and that's not articulated anywhere on the website. Can we change any of the copy to address that objection or that concern? You're trying to find ways to capture leaky revenue no matter where you see it. So if, your checkout form is too long, pare back the number of fields on it, run a test on that, determine what the actual lift is. If people are coming in from an unexpected demographic and they have a different set of priorities and they're buying the product for reasons that you didn't necessarily understand, put together a landing page for it, rework the homepage if you get less traffic, or direct an ad campaign that addresses that sort of objection, that sort of thing. You basically listen and then try and give people what they want, right? And do it in a way that still resonates with your business goals.
Okay, well, we'll go through some of those methodologies in more detail and then go on and look at how we can set up some of those tests and use the research information we've got. But just quickly, as an aside here, there's a bit of a chicken and egg thing going on, a chicken and egg equation here, because of course you're going to get your research information, but you won't know necessarily what questions to ask of that until you can see what's going on.
Yeah. So as it applies to an interview, I usually come in with 5 or 6 questions about using the product that come from what's called a job to be done interview. And I can cite a link that provides a lot of insight around that in the show notes if you desire, where you're basically asking, okay, well, why did you come to the website today? Because I have to capture you through the website. So there's that. What do you do? What motivates you? What were the objections that you had before you came in and bought this product? What other competitors did you look at? What was the last thing that held you back on it? What are the things that excited you about this? And any of those questions, usually they bring back a response that is interesting in some capacity. And then I sit back and I ask as many open-ended questions as humanly possible before I move on to the next one. I'll be like, tell me more about that. You said this. Can you expand on that a little bit? And then I just shut up and listen. And that's the time when I usually get really interesting stories, right? So yeah, there is definitely, I agree with you. There's kind of an unknown situation, right? Like we don't know what we don't know. And so when a client comes in and they're like, why are you getting on the phone with these customers? I'm like, well, I don't know. And they're like, well, why are we doing it? And I'm like, well, precisely because we don't know and because we'll be surprised by what they tell us. And that's usually the case, especially if you've never done it before. It's very much like you get a ton of quick wins from the first interview. You get a few more from the second interview. The less frequently you do it, the more surprised you are by the first round of it, I've found in my experience. Yeah, I agree with you that it feels risky to be doing that, especially when all you want to do is get to the tests and get the results from the tests. It's way more exciting. Usually they result in heat maps also, and they're pretty pictures and people just kind of love those. But I agree with you that you definitely have to do a little bit of selling to convince people of it. But once they see the power of it, then in my experience, they're willing to go deeper on it and continue doing it.
Okay, well, let's dig down into some of these quantitative and qualitative research methods that you mentioned earlier. Mm-hmm. You've talked about Google Analytics. There's browser and device analysis. You've got your heat and scroll maps that we talked about, behavior recordings and heuristic evaluations as well. Talk us through some of those and just touch upon how these help, and then we'll look at the qualitative stuff afterwards.
Yeah, Google Analytics is one of those things that's just ungodly powerful, but it's also such a poor user experience that you probably don't actually use it very well. You're making sure that there's no huge fires or that you use it to check your overall traffic numbers, but that's really it. And this happens in businesses of all sizes. I see them not fine-tuning their Google Analytics install well. So there's kind of two things that I'm doing with that. One of them is I'm preparing it so I can track your conversion rate effectively. So I'm setting up goals like somebody makes a purchase, somebody goes to this page, somebody views your introductory video. And then I'm picking out funnels. So if you're a SaaS, there's pretty consistent funnel from like home, pricing, sign up, onboarding. So I create those. And if you're an e-commerce site, it's home, landing, product, cart, confirmation, and then you've successfully placed an order. So that sort of thing. So I'm putting those together, and those are extremely powerful utilities that you get for free. The other side of Google Analytics is more for like one-off tweaks that have everything to do with optimization and very little to do with actually testing. I will go through your browser analysis and your device analysis and your site speed and do all of the boring quotidian work of fixing your site so that it loads properly across browsers and across devices. Because every single client that I work with, it's like, your site is converting 35% worse on insert browser name here. Why is that? Your site is dismal on mobile. Why is that? And sometimes there are easy answers to that. Like there's one that I work with that's a B2B SaaS that's an email provider, right? And they don't get a whole lot of trial signups on mobile because they're an email provider. And so you would need to like migrate your list over and do a bunch of fiddly wonky things. But the call to action on mobile for them is start a trial. So I actually set it up so that you can request a demo from their sales team instead. And demo requests spiked. Demos convert to trial signups at like something like 85% for them. It's something crazy high. So you're capturing a lot of interest and funneling it in a way that makes sense for the person. If I'm on the train in a subway tunnel and I can't actually sign up for your service, but I can throw my email address in a form, I'm going to go ahead and do that. It's like the path of least resistance. That's one example of it influencing an A/B test really effectively. Most of the time, it's like your responsive doesn't work well. We need to fine tune your mobile experience in some capacity. And those are design improvements. Like I'm looking at it and trying to figure out design improvements. So that's it for Google Analytics. And a little bit about browser and device analysis as well. Heat and scroll maps those are the real like quantitative to A/B test thing that I do. I look at where people are clicking and scrolling, and most importantly, where they are not clicking or scrolling. So if you have 3 calls to action on the page and everybody is beelining for one of them, does that one fulfill your business goals? Does it map to revenue generation? Are people bouncing off of the page and going in really weird directions in your funnel? I've seen so many SaaS businesses have like the demo app and then there's no call to action from the demo app. I've had them do like the features page and then it's like you have to backtrack. I've had them not have sticky navigation. So it helps you be intentional about your navigation on every page of the site. And that may not necessarily mean it's consistent navigation on every page of the site, but it's the navigation that makes the most sense to move the person along towards conversion.
And just as an interjection here, because as a content marketer and a nerd for all of this stuff, actually, when you get into that position, when you're evaluating a SaaS piece of software and you go in, say, and do an organic search on Google, you land on a long form piece of content like a blog post with a video in, and you end up signing up for that demo, and then you end up buying the product. It's actually quite masterful when it works properly and goes through, and you can see where they've obviously, refined that process and tested it. So me as the customer for that interaction, it's a very seamless, streamlined process through their content marketing funnel to the end goal of actually me making a purchase. And when it's done properly, it's fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you can even, when it's done properly, it's fantastic. And then the initial things that you get from it are also quite scary, right? So if you have a huge long piece of content and the call to action is all the way at the end, you run a scroll map and find that only 20% of your readers are getting to the end, then you have like maybe issues with the headline of the content or the initial pitch in the content, or it's not grabbing people, or they're just Instapapering it and coming back later. So is there an opportunity to put the call to action earlier after the first few paragraphs? Is there an opportunity to rewrite that content and approach it in a different, like more rigorous strategy around it? You have to be as like logical and scientific about it as possible, but there's also very much this like emotional response to getting this data back. You're like, oh God, this wasn't actually working like I expected. And well, what now? You know, it's not enough to just write the content. You have to understand its ramifications on your readers and your prospective customers.
And it's fascinating. We've just started using Mouseflow for several client projects and actually looking at what you think people are doing and then what they are actually in reality doing with exactly the sort of interactions you're talking about there is really interesting. And you can instantly see, oh my goodness, if only they had the option to do that there or to do this there at that certain point of scrolling or whatever. And there are various tools as well that we can use. There's Visual Website Optimizer, isn't there? And a few others. Mm-hmm. Talk us through a few of those, because there's plenty out there that are affordable for small businesses, aren't there?
Yeah. So Visual Website Optimizer is one of the two big A/B testing frameworks out there. It's them and Optimizely. They're kind of the Canon and Nikon of the A/B testing world. They're in an eternal feature shootout, and they're both good businesses. Go with whichever you want. But VWO is interesting because they also include heat maps and scroll maps and behavior recordings. So you can sign up for, I think it's like a $49 a month plan with VWO, or it might even be less than that. And you get this basically free. So what I do with my clients is I sign up for VWO. I have a huge agency plan. I get them on there. And then I just run behavior recordings and heat maps on all the pages of their site while I'm doing interviews and all the other bits of my research. Then I come back in 5 or 6 days, take a look, and I'm like, okay, well, here are the heat maps. Here are the scroll maps. Here's some interesting things that we might be able to test out of it. There's another one called Hotjar. That's a competitor to Mouseflow. They do behavior recordings, and I think there is actually a free plan for Hotjar. There's Crazy Egg, which has a pretty generous trial period. There are a lot of ways to test on little or no budget. In the United States, usually corporate petty cash cards have a $500 limit. You can easily come in under this limit and get a couple of usability tests even from a site called usertesting.com. You can run a heuristic evaluation in your spare time. I have a whole checklist for that in one of my courses, and there are a ton online. Conversion XL has one. I think Copy Hackers has one. You can run Hotjar. You can get a VWO account and do this pretty easily and with very little like managerial support even, where you're just gathering a ton of data and saying, okay, well, this is what it tells us. What now? What do we do with that? And so many customers just don't bother talking with their users that a lot of people end up shocked that the data says this because they thought something different.
Mm-hmm. Just actually, you mentioned Conversion XL. I spoke with Pep Laja of Conversion XL a few years ago now on the podcast, and as well as your good self, he really knows his stuff when it comes to conversion testing and everything related to it. Yeah, let's move on as well. Okay, then to the behavior recordings. We've touched on that. And then the heuristic evaluation after that, if you would.
Sure. So behavior recordings are, I've been talking about it a lot, haven't described it. It's essentially you are getting a video back of somebody's cursor going around the screen, seeing where they hesitate, when they scroll down, whether they scroll back up, what they're highlighting, that sort of stuff. And if you think that's only for desktop, you get little dot to show where somebody's fingers are, 2 dots if they're pinch zooming, that sort of stuff. And these are just insanely powerful for understanding more real world behavior about what people are doing. It's especially good from a content perspective for your listeners because, okay, well, how far are they going down? Are they reading only 3 paragraphs and clicking? So there's a tech blog I used to work with called The Wirecutter for about 1.5 years. And they do like recommendations and deep dives of tons of different products in a specific category. So they find the best exercise headphones, for instance. And the behavior recordings, I'll probably share this bit. it basically showed exactly what I was thinking because it's exactly how I browse the Wirecutter. I load the page on the Wirecutter and I see, wow, that's a really tiny scroll bar. And I scroll down and back up and I'm like, wow, they really did their research. That's a ton of research. What's the pick? Oh, okay, that's the pick. Okay, I'm done. Nobody ever reads, I mean, some people do because they're nerds, but they read the entire thing on Wirecutter, right? You just go, you look like this person is trustworthy. They clearly know what they're talking about. It's pretty well written. Here's the recommendation. I'm going to go and click it. And so your interaction with it is actually relatively tiny. From a content standpoint, it's doing the right work. Like it's not BS content, right? It's still valuable. But what it needs to do is signify as trustworthy in that scenario. And it does a very handsome job of that. It functions really well. Are people reading every single word of the content? No. Is it fulfilling the business goals of the Wirecutter? Absolutely it is, right? So that's an example of behavior recordings working in a way that may not have been terribly expected. You put in 300 hours of research or 30,000 word article, and then you put it up and nobody reads it. Well, that must feel really deflating. But in fact, it actually is doing the right job. People just don't have an attention span.
You're listening to the Content Champion podcast, showcasing the training and tools you need to become a content marketing champion in your online business.
And again, a question that comes out of that, when you're working with a specific client, and it's down to context, I guess, and the psychology of the context of conversion. When you're looking through those scroll maps and behavior recordings, when people reach that balance of that sort of seesaw of information and value, and then they sort of gain that level of trust that they want, do you find that's the sort of roughly the same place all the time in all the content? Or is that then related to how they found the site and, whether they came in from a certain search term, the intent that goes with that? Do you see what I'm getting at?
You're getting at a really, really great point, and this is something that could probably be a 3-hour response, but it's very much a fine art to come up with the right next question to be asking yourself about the data, right? Because if I look at somebody just scrolling, and then they click, I'm like, okay, well, is it converting? Well, then I would go to Google Analytics and see, is it converting because I've configured the goals over there properly, hopefully. Okay, well, that's interesting. So it is working really well. What can we do to convey the trustworthiness of it better? Is that the right question to be asking? Okay, well, we get some people on the phone and then we ask them, well, what are your motivations going through this page? Or run a usability test, which we'll talk about in a moment, where somebody is vocalizing their inner monologue as they're going through, because I need to validate those hunches. Those are a little bit more expensive and time consuming to put together, but they also, by this point, you might see, I know what questions to ask, right? So I'm saying, okay, find the right exercise headphones on this site, plunk you into the front page of the Wirecutter, right? Okay, well, I didn't know that was the right question to be asking. Once you get to the exercise headphones page, here's some more questions. What is your impression of this page? Is it easy to understand what exercise headphones to be getting? Most importantly, is there anything holding you back from buying those exercise headphones? And is there anything that we can do to improve the credibility of this page overall, the trustworthiness of this page? And those are all pretty open-ended questions, right? But they're specific enough because we're still trying to drill into our hunches. And by that point, hopefully, if we've done our job right, and if we got a decent enough recruit for the usability test, we're going to get high-quality insights from them that will allow us to rework the layout of this page or present it in a way that converts better and conveys trustworthiness a little bit more effectively. And that's when you run the A/B test. You're running that right there.
It's really interesting. I'm going to tell my dad about this because he's a retired maths and computers teacher, and he's going to love looking into the ramifications of this, because it occurs to me that from a content marketing perspective, you can make blanket assumptions about, oh, okay, well, look, I'm going to check these keywords. I'm going to do my research on the content, the audience, and come up with a long form piece of content. But what we're saying strategically, if you actually drill down into this on a statistical, scientific level, the piece of content that converts best for that audience with that particular way into the site could be a video with 2 lines of text under it.
It could be, yeah. Or it could be a 40,000 word marketing page. And there's no way to know until we actually get in front of them and ask them. Historically, I mean, you can look at other blogs such as Copy Hackers or Conversion XL and figure out what circumstances a long form page is more likely to convert. And that helps. It's best practices and, it's familiar to a lot of people. But you can go one better. They call it optimization because you start with the best practices and then figure out where those break down for your business.
For sure. Okay. And let's finish up the quantitative research section with the evaluation of everything we've just talked about.
Yeah, this is the one that you can probably just do by yourself for $0. Heuristic evaluation is an ancient usability technique going back to time immemorial. You have a checklist of heuristics and you are determining if the site actually fulfills those heuristics, if they are applicable. So, for example, is it easy to check out on mobile? Are there any extraneous form fields? Does it ask for billing and shipping? And if so, am I delivering a digital product? Hey, well, get rid of the shipping address in that situation. Does it offer I'll continue harping on mobile forms, but does it offer the right keyboard? So when I'm entering the credit card, does it switch to the numeric keypad? Does it force autocorrect on addresses, which it really shouldn't be doing because addresses are usually proper nouns? Like in Chicago, we have Diversity Avenue. And if it autocorrects to Diversity Avenue, then you're doing it wrong, right? That is a bad address and you're not going to get your thing. Those are basically just you going through, trying to perform transactions, trying to find things, pretending like you're a user, and trying to convert into a customer. And these are things that a shockingly small amount of people actually do. One thing I love doing is going through the exercise where I make all of the developers at a site, I give them all dummy credit cards and make them sign up for the service. And I'm like, tell me how frustrating that was. Just write it up. And they all rebel against it. They all completely hate doing this because they have better things to do, right? But then they go through and actually do it and they're like, oh my God. Oh no. And these are the things that are taking your money. That's actually what's funding your paycheck. The thing that's funding your paycheck is broken. And so that's another flip side of it. But a heuristic evaluation, you're going through yourself and just clear-eyed saying, does it meet this mark? Checkbox, yes or no. In e-commerce, for example, are there related products? Are they sensible to the actual thing that you're providing? Are there recommendations for products that are particularly popular? If I'm going through from a content marketing standpoint, is there a call to action at the end of the post? Is there a right rail that provides a similar call to action? Is the navigation sticky? Does extraneous metadata for it, like byline and date and stuff like that, does it fulfill the overall goals of the page? Or can we get rid of them for things that are more like evergreen content? Because if you have evergreen content from 2011, people are less likely to trust it. Those are things that I would be asking in any sort of heuristic evaluation of a site. For my clients, I develop these bespoke because I've been doing it for a number of years. But you can find these from basically any usability testing site just to make sure that it's ticking the right boxes. It's pretty easy to put together. You can do it probably in an afternoon.
Mm-hmm. The 2 things that come out of that, a couple of quick stories. I've got a friend who works for a large government department here in the UK, their website, and he does exactly this type of testing, but over reams and reams and reams of pages and paperwork and checkpoints to do. And he said that, he described to me what he did. It's absolutely incredible, the amount of minute evaluation they do and things that you wouldn't think would be broken and assumptions, again, that you make are broken. And this link doesn't go there. And you find out that, people are going down Warren's rabbit holes of usability that they shouldn't be. So they have to rail that all back in. That was really interesting talking about that. But the other thing that reminded me of when you were talking is another friend, and I can't name this company because they're a big UK brand. They didn't do any of the research and testing we're talking about and just thought they'd get their whole website, massive project, redesigned because it would increase conversions. And then, of course, it didn't because they weren't basing it on any evaluation. And then it's kind of everyone.
It looks nicer, right?
It looks nicer. And then everyone's sort of twiddling pencils and twiddling their fingers saying, yeah, but it doesn't convert as well as the one that didn't look quite as nice. Who did the research? And that's a very good example of, I guess, why you have to to start with this. So let's move on to the qualitative research methods. We've got user interviews, usability tests, and surveys. You've touched upon some of these already.
Yeah. So user interviews, kind of already described those. You are getting somebody on the phone. One thing I didn't really talk about is recruitment. There's a utility called Ethnio, ETHN.io, that basically puts a screener on your site, and it asks for customers like contact information, whether they'd be cool with an interview. It's very focused in that way. But then you can add in like qualifying questions. You want to generally cut out about 50% of the people at least that are coming in the door and recruit from a variety of different use cases and demographics. You might want to get like a power user or a total novice, who's somebody who's coming to the site for the first time. You basically send them a link. I use a website called Calendly. It's Calendly. It was how we organized this call. And it connects with your Google Calendar to find available time. You provide a little bit of air gap before and after the call so that you can prepare and like decompress psychologically after it, because interviews wipe you. You are not a hero enough that you can just bang, 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 do a bunch of interviews. And you get people on the phone and ask a bunch of questions, listen to their story, and try not to push back because the customer is right in this situation. It is often a surprising insight that you can drill down into a little bit more. I think that's, and you compensate them for your time. So I give people usually like an Amazon gift card or like a freebie or a free year of the service or something like that.
Okay. And then this kind of dovetails into those usability tests as well, because then you're starting to be informed by what you've discovered.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so the usability tests are, you get a recording of somebody on a computer. Usually they'll turn on like the iSight camera on the top and record the screen, and you'll get kind of a picture-in-picture thing. And you're asking them to complete various tasks and vocalize your internal monologue as much as humanly possible the entire time. Then you get back a video and you just watch the video, determine where things are breaking down, what surprised you, was it easy for people to find, were they pleased, were they frustrated, what emotions were they feeling during it? So it's kind of a combination of qualitative and quantitative, because if somebody converts but they were angry doing it, like that's not good either, right? Like that's an opportunity to begin the customer relationship on a little bit better footing.
And I can remember just looking at surveys as well, because I want to get on to what we do with all this information, how we set up sort of meaningful A/B tests in a minute. But the last qualitative research method is surveys, really. And I can remember doing one of these as a teenager, and it is about the questions you ask, because of course, if you ask closed questions, you get nothing. I can remember just saying yes, no, yes, no, yes, yes, no. And then I was allowed to go. And I thought, well, that's not really very helpful to either of us, is it?
Yeah. So there are a ton of like conversion focused surveys out there that you can do. Typeform and Wufoo are both good, cheap or free utilities. I think they both have free plans, and you're getting kind of a combination of qualitative and quantitative insights from this too. There's something called the Net Promoter Score, which if you haven't heard, you probably filled it out at some point. It's on a scale from 1 to 10. How likely is it that you would recommend this product or service to a friend or colleague? Right. You know that one, right? And there's like an automatic calculation for it that came out from this one fancy pants consulting firm and whatever have you. That's very quantitative, right? It's literally a 1 to 10. But then on forums, you can add in free text fields. And I love asking what are called the brain audit questions, which are usually for testimonials. So I'll send these after you get a product. And it's, I forget the 6. I'll list them in the show notes. But it's like, what was the thing that held you back before you bought this? List the number 1 benefit, list 3 more benefits. Is there anything else you'd like to add? There's 6 questions. I think I just listed 4 of them, but you get the idea. It's trying to get a sense of somebody's thought process as they went through the process of conversion, right? Maybe they came back to the site 3 or 4 times and hesitated before they actually bought it. What held them back? Was that valid? Is it like a $5,000 service? Like people tend to balk on those things for a little bit, or get approval from the rest of their organization for B2B products, that sort of thing. That's a good starting point for putting together a survey that offers a lot of qualitative insights. And you know what I do with those surveys? I'll send them out automatically after somebody purchases, or I'll throw it on the front page of the site as like an annual survey and get as many people as humanly possible. Each of those are very different research techniques that offer different insights. One of them you get in basically continuously. And then sometimes I'll get back a survey that's particularly interesting, and I'll be like, what's your phone number? Can I call you? Here's my Calendly link. And then we'll have more interviews because somebody sent something that was particularly interesting. And now they get a free year of the service or an Amazon gift card or whatever have you. And then we have a little bit more to go on as far as A/B testing insights. So just to kind of sum up, like through this, I'm never just running a test and then sitting back and waiting 3 weeks for the results. I'm always thinking about the next test to be running. And there's got to be a sort of pipeline that comes along with this, right? So there's research. I'm always doing research in some capacity. And it can be looking at heat maps. It can be conducting interviews, whatever. And I'm coordinating with developers and designers in the client's team usually, or I'm hiring them of my own to build these out as prototypes, right? Because we have to make them into something that's testable. And sometimes that actually requires a significant development effort.
Okay, and this is the key pivot, though. This is the key pivot for me as a small business owner or content marketer listening to this. You've got a ton of experience then informing you when you've got all this research, ongoing research, what questions you ask of that research. And this is crucial because I guess this is where you can get it wrong. So how do we do this? How do we go about asking the right questions informed by that research?
That's another 3-hour answer there. The very broad stroke answer is, are there opportunities to capture more revenue in whatever we're looking at? And if so, what shape does that take, right? So sometimes it's very clear cut, like your form to check out has 58 fields and it needs 3. Okay, great, get rid of 55 fields, solved. Sometimes it's much more squishy. And I think that's why you're asking this question. From a content standpoint, you're appealing to specific desires from the customer. And so let's do something that is just very theoretical, but not unreasonable, that involves both quantitative and qualitative methodology. I post something to my blog and I think it's completely amazing and super evergreen and really, really helpful for people. Very few people go to it. Very few people link back to it. And very few people are scrolling when they actually get there. All of those are quantitative things that I'm pulling off of Google Analytics, heat maps, and scroll maps. And so I'm taking a look at that. Okay, well, if that's the case, maybe I didn't have correct what the motivations were that people were coming in. Or maybe they were already fulfilling those needs somewhere else, right? Or maybe this wasn't ranking well on Google and we need to find some way to handle the SEO of it better. There are a lot of different potential explanations for this. And these are things, this is the moment right here that having 10 years of experience in this industry is much more valuable. I might search on blog posts to be like, why isn't my content performing well? If you are particularly expert in this, you might have other ideas of your own around it. Talking to colleagues and brainstorming those ideas. I will be the very first person to admit that I do not have all the answers to absolutely everything that I do. And so a lot of the time I'm like, this isn't working and I don't know. Can we get on a call and brainstorm some ideas why? And usually my client and other team members they come in a little bit frustrated because there's an emotional impact of this isn't working. But then they also wonder, okay, well, what are the potential explanations for it? None of those are right. We don't know because we haven't followed the hunch through to figure out what those are. But now that we have the questions and the hunch is on them, we can start conducting interviews or usability tests that ask open-ended questions that lead us to confirm or deny whether those hunches are the case, right? And then we start to validate those ideas. And that's when we can actually take action. I think the hardest step within this is that brainstorming, because you can also come up with an idea that might be the wrong idea. And then you run into this very like Dunning-Kruger unknown thing where you're very, very sure of an explanation that turns out to be wrong. And then you run an A/B test and it tanks. And there's no way around it. It's very demoralizing. Dealing with the impact of that, you've done a lot of work and then you have a failing test. But most of the time for me at least, I end up with a test that moves a little bit more in the right direction and shows that I've hit on something. And, well, that's interesting. Okay, let's explore that a little bit further.
We could talk for 3 hours on this because it's fascinating, but wouldn't it be great if you'd written a book about it? And you have. And it's called the A/B Testing Manual. And I've had an advanced copy and it's fascinating. So tell us about the book if we want to learn more about this and where we can get it from.
Yeah, so the book is part of a whole course, actually. So if you go to abtestingmanual.com, it's a very creative domain name. You can take a look. There are a bunch of components to it. There's 5.5 hours of videos that I recorded with my friend Patrick McKenzie. He developed the first ever A/B testing framework for Ruby on Rails and now does content for Atlas at Stripe. I flew him in from Tokyo and we banged out 5.5 hours of amazing, actionable video around kind of business and procedural things, kind of things that I'm talking about here. And then the book itself is, I think, like 230 pages split between research, actual how to run the A/B test, and then what to do with it operationally in your organization. And then it comes with all of the like checklists and toolkits and everything that I use with my clients. So if you're wondering, how do I run a heuristic evaluation? Buy the A/B testing manual. How do I set up a project management system so that I can come up with A/B testing ideas and shepherd them through the process? Well, I have a Trello board available for you in the A/B testing manual. You are getting the idea. And so I wrote this whole thing. It came out as of this recording like 2 or 3 weeks ago, and about 400 people have bought it, really liked it so far. It's been going really well.
Fantastic. Well, look, just before we go on to the PS question, where else can we find you online, Nick, aside from that?
Draft.nu is my business, and abtestingmanual.com is the book. If you want to sign up I write a weekly letter to people, draft.nu/letters, and a lot of it is about A/B testing. Some of it is about other random things, such as the best deep dish pizza in Chicago. So if you ever find yourself flying here. But yeah, that's pretty much it.
Wait for it, listeners. Here comes the PS question.
Okay, this is what I call the PS question. Before you go, could you please share one advanced A/B testing tactic that we can use right after the show?
Yes, advanced A/B testing tactic. So my recommendation would be if you have a ton of traffic coming into your site. So this is definitely more advanced. If you're getting more than probably like, I would say 2,000 transactions every month, run what is called, and this is like intermediate to advanced, run what's called a bandit experiment. And it basically uses an algorithm to determine whether or not variation is converting better or worse, and automatically ramps up or down the proportion of traffic that's going in. So remember when I said that A/B testing is 50-50? Not so with a bandit experiment. If your variant performs really, really well, all of a sudden it's going to ramp up to 100. Now here's where it gets advanced. What are the criteria that proposes that ramp up? Like, when do we turn off a given variation and give up on it? Bandit algorithms have a varying degree of greediness that you can ascribe to them. So they can be like, well, we might be sure about this. We're going to let it go for a little bit longer. Or they're just like, nope, we're done. If you can take a look at varying degrees of greedy bandit algorithms for your business, setting up a bandit algorithm is easy. Fine-tuning it is the much harder thing. You can do this within a week if you have a really wonky data science background, or you can just put together a bandit test within a day using your normal A/B testing framework. There's usually like a checkbox that they have that's like ramp it up or down, and it's like, okay, great. Are you greedy or not? Okay, great. There's your pull down. That's something that you can do immediately after this show and begin thinking about more advanced, intelligent, like artificially intelligent ways to optimize your site.
And just as a PPS question, if you would, how far away are we from having an algorithmic A/B testing system where we can just literally plug everything in, press a button, and it will spit out, you need to do X, Y, Z to increase your conversions? Or is that a long way off?
I bet those already exist in Fortune 500 companies. Like, I bet, thinking of very data-driven companies like Amazon, Netflix, Facebook, eBay, they all run A/B tests all the time and are ramping up or down variations based on this. I bet they're probably using something with some antecedent in machine learning already. I bet it exists. I think that it's a matter of that is going to start at the biggest of organizations that have the most amount of traffic. The real question is when it trickles down to like me, right? And you listening to this who probably aren't in that bucket. And I think we're probably 3 or 4 years off from that happening. but I think it's there and you probably use it day to day. I think it exists.
Fantastic. Well, look, that's a fascinating interview. Great answers to the PS and the PPS question. And all that remains for me to say, Nick, is thanks very much for your time. And I wish you all the best with everything in future.
Thank you so much. It's an honor. I hope this was helpful.
You've been listening to the Content Champion podcast, available at contentchampion.com and on iTunes. Until next time, thanks for listening.